Go find a cheap ballpoint pen. Look at the plastic cap. Right at the very top, you will see a tiny, hollowed out hole. For your entire life, you probably assumed this was a design flaw, or maybe a way to save plastic, or perhaps a vent to keep the ink from exploding. You have probably sat in a boring classroom or a stressful meeting staring at a blank wall and mindlessly chewed on that exact piece of plastic. But what you didn't know is that if you had accidentally inhaled while chewing on that cap, that microscopic hole is the only piece of engineering standing between you and a suffocating death. You have been putting a highly regulated, internationally mandated safety device in your mouth without ever realizing it. To understand why this tiny hole exists, we have to go back to the invention of the modern ballpoint pen and the massive, unintended biological crisis it created. In the 1950s, a French manufacturer named Marcel Bic introduced the Bic Cristal. It was a masterpiece of cheap manufacturing. It was a clear, hexagonal plastic tube that wouldn't roll off a desk, filled with smooth flowing ink and topped with a solid, airtight plastic cap. The pen was a global sensation. It was cheap enough to lose, but reliable enough to write perfectly every time. Millions of them flooded into schools, offices, and homes across the entire planet. But almost immediately, human psychology collided with mass production. Humans have an innate subconscious habit of oral fixation. When we are stressed, deep in thought, or simply bored, we put things in our mouths. We bite our nails, we chew on ice, and when you put a perfectly sized, highly chewable piece of plastic like a pen cap in the hands of millions of children and anxious adults, they are going to chew on it. This created a hidden nightmare. A pen cap is smooth, cylindrical, and slick with saliva. If someone is chewing on it and suddenly laughs, gasps, or takes a sharp intake of breath, that cap can shoot straight to the back of the throat and lodge itself deep inside the trachea, which is the main human windpipe. Because the original pen caps were completely solid and airtight, they acted like a perfect plastic cork. Once lodged in the throat, they completely sealed off the airway. No oxygen could get to the lungs, no carbon dioxide could escape. A person choking on a solid pen cap would have only minutes before they suffered irreversible brain damage or death. And because the plastic was smooth and wedged tight, the Heimlich maneuver was often completely ineffective. Paramedics would arrive too late. It became a silent, terrifying epidemic. Hundreds of people, primarily young children, were dying from a piece of stationery. The executives at Bic realized they had a massive crisis on their hands. They couldn't stop people from chewing on the pens. You cannot engineer human anxiety out of existence, so they had to engineer the pen to survive the human body. In 1991, Bic introduced a completely invisible revolution. They took their iconic solid pen cap and drilled a tiny, precise hole straight through the top. From an ink perspective, this was actually a terrible idea. A hole in the cap exposes the ballpoint tip to the air, which increases the risk of the ink drying out and ruining the pen. Manufacturers hate anything that degrades the lifespan of their product, but from a biological perspective, it was a stroke of absolute genius. If a child accidentally swallowed this newly designed cap and it lodged tight in their windpipe, the hole at the top acted as a bypass valve. It was carefully calculated to allow just enough of an oxygen current to pass through the plastic barrier and reach the lungs. It wasn't enough air for the person to run a marathon, but it was exactly enough air to keep them breathing, conscious, and alive while an ambulance rushed them to a hospital to have the object surgically removed. That one tiny hole stopped the clock. It turned a 3-minute death sentence into a manageable medical emergency. The design was so breathtakingly effective that the world took notice. The engineering was so undeniably life-saving that it actually became global law. Today, the International Organization for Standardization, known as ISO, maintains a strict regulation called ISO 11540. This law mandates that any writing instrument designed for or likely to be used by children must have a ventilated cap. If you look around your house right now, you will see the fingerprints of this life-saving design everywhere.
Look at a Lego minifigure. Have you ever noticed that the classic Lego head has a hollow tube running through the center? That isn't just to connect the pieces, it is the exact same safety principle. If a child swallows the head, air can pass through the center. The greatest engineering on Earth is the engineering you never notice. We walk through a world covered in invisible safety nets designed by engineers who anticipate our mistakes, our anxieties, and our foolishness. So the next time you find yourself stuck on a difficult problem, staring at a blank page, and you lift that pen to your mouth to chew on the cap, take a close look at the top. You aren't just looking at a cheap piece of plastic, you're looking at a brilliant piece of medical engineering. You were holding a tiny, silent guardian that was designed entirely to save you from yourself.